You're an ancient human living tens of thousands of years ago. Today is your workday, and your job is hunting. No suits, no cars, not even a donkey. You get nothing but your 2 feet and a hungry stomach pushing you forward. You trek through forests, climb hills, and follow animal tracks, powered only by your legs. Walking was humanity's first transportation system. Simple, universal, and exhausting. You could only go as far as your legs could carry you before collapsing in the dirt. Long-distance travel? Forget it. That's why the domestication of animals was like unlocking a cheat code in human history. Horses, oxen, camels. Suddenly, humans had horsepower before horsepower was even a word. A horse could carry you faster than you could ever run. Camels turned deserts from death traps into trade routes. Animals weren't just pets or tools. They were the engines of early civilization. Riding horse didn't just mean getting somewhere faster. It reshaped how societies fought wars and built empires. A soldier on horseback could cover huge distances, charge into battle, and dominate a poor guy stuck fighting on foot. The Mongols practically built the largest land empire in history on horses' backs. And the wheel transformed travel into something faster, smoother, and more practical. Someone in Mesopotamia around 3500 BC comes up with this wild idea, a circle that spins. At first it wasn't even for travel, just a pottery wheel to make bowls and jars faster. But then, some clever craftsman probably squinted at it and thought, wait, what if we slapped this thing under a cart? And just like that, the wheel changed everything. Instead of breaking their backs carrying giant logs on their shoulders, people could just toss them onto a wheeled cart and drag them with way less effort. That moment basically kick-started a whole new era of transportation. And once the cart rolled in, it was game over. War, trade, travel, everything leveled up. The chariot turned movement into innovation. They were the sports car of the ancient world. Egypt used them to dominate in war. China and Rome turned them into machines of speed, power, and prestige. If you were rolling into battle on a chariot, you weren't just fighting, you were making an entrance. And the Romans, they really cranked things up a notch. They built roads, actual paved highway across Europe and beyond. These roads weren't just for marching legions. They were the arteries of empire. Trade, communication, cultural exchange. All on stone-paved highways that, unbelievably, some are still around today. Rome even had something like an early public transport service. Like an Uber, but with horse-drawn carriages and without surge pricing. You could actually book a ride on the Roman road network. Around the 17th and 18th centuries came an invention that would change the world forever. The steam engine. At first, inventors like Benz Patent and James Watt weren't thinking about cars at all. They were just trying to pump water out of coal mines or power textile machines. The principle of the steam engine was brilliantly simple. Boil water, build up pressure, and use that pressure to drive a piston or a wheel. For the first time in history, energy no longer came from living bodies. It came from fuel. And then cue Nicolas Joseph Cugnot, a Frenchman who in the 1760s built what you might call the first steam-powered car. Except it was slow, heavy, and kind of a disaster. The thing was so clunky, it apparently crashed into a wall. Not exactly a smooth debut. Steam, however, found its true home in trains. Railroads spread like wildfire, shrinking continents and making it possible to move goods and people faster than ever. Steam didn't win the car game directly, but it changed the world indirectly. Once people got a taste of machine-powered travel, there was no going back. Early inventors tried electricity with primitive cars. Yep, believe it or not, before gasoline ruled the streets, electric cars were once ahead. In the late 19th century, in the US especially, they were the cool option. Quiet, clean, and easier to operate than gasoline cars. For a while, electric cars outsold gasoline ones, but the catch was batteries. They were heavy, had limited range, and took ages to charge. Gasoline, on the other hand, was cheap, energy-dense, and refueling was quick. So when push came to shove, electric cars lost the first round. That's when a man named Carl Benz stepped into the picture. In 1885, he built the Benz Patent-Motorwagen, which is often called the first true car. It looked a bit like a motorized tricycle, but it had the key ingredient, an internal combustion gasoline engine. This was the spark that lit the fire for modern automobiles. And here's the twist. It wasn't Carl who proved the car's worth. It was his wife, Bertha. In 1888, she secretly took the motorwagon for a road trip without telling her husband. She drove about 66 miles to her mother's house, fixing breakdowns on the way with hairpins and stopping at a pharmacy to buy fuel. At that time, gas stations weren't really a thing yet. Gasoline was only sold in pharmacies because it was used as a solvent. That trip wasn't just a stunt. Showed people that the car wasn't some fragile toy. It was a practical machine that could handle real life. Bertha Benz might just be the first road trip influencer in history. By the late 19th century, it was a three-way race. steam, electricity, or gasoline. Steam cars were powerful, but slow to start. Electric cars were clean, but limited. Gasoline was noisy, smelly, and a bit dangerous, but it had range, power, and flexibility. In the end, gasoline won. Not because it was perfect, but because it was good enough in all the right ways. The real explosion of car culture didn't happen until Henry Ford showed up. In 1908, he introduced the Model T. And here's the genius. It wasn't the first car, but it was the first car almost anyone could actually afford. Ford's big idea was the moving assembly line. Instead of one group of workers building an entire car, the car itself moved along a conveyor, with each worker adding a part. Suddenly, building a car was faster, cheaper, and more consistent. By the 1920s and 30s, cars stopped being just machines and started becoming cultural icons. The car was freedom, rebellion, style, all rolled into one. Gangsters in getaway cars, young couples sneaking out on late-night drives, Hollywood movies showing glamorous stars behind the wheel. It wasn't just transportation, it was identity. The car became an extension of personality, like a rolling fashion statement. If you wanted to show off, you didn't buy a bigger horse anymore. You bought a shiny car. World War II gave the automobile another big push. The Jeep became legendary on the battlefield. Tough, versatile, and dependable. The Volkswagen Beetle, originally pushed under Nazi Germany, would later reinvent itself as a symbol of peace and counterculture in the 1960s. War may be destructive, but the technology it churned out often sticks around, and cars were no exception. After the war, the boom was on. In the 1950s and 60s, especially in America, the car was practically the heartbeat of society. Highways stretched across the country, suburbs sprouted everywhere. Teenagers found themselves cruising down endless roads in muscle cars. Car wasn't just about getting from A to B, it was about living the American dream. Big fins, roaring engines, chrome that sparkled in the sun. Cars were art, power, and freedom, all rolled into one. And the car industry loved it, pumping out models designed not only to move people, but to seduce them. The oil crisis in 1970s lifted efficient designs. When oil prices spiked, suddenly those massive American cars guzzling fuel like frat boys at a keg party didn't look so smart. Gas was expensive. Lines at the pump stretched for blocks. People started rethinking whether bigger was really better. That's when Japan entered the scene like a quiet but deadly ninja. Toyota, Honda, and Nissan introduced small, fuel-efficient cars that didn't break the bank at the gas station. They weren't flashy at first, but they were reliable, practical, and cheap to run. The Toyota Corolla in particular became a legend. Simple, efficient, and durable. While Detroit was still obsessed with size and horsepower, Japan won people over with cars that actually fit the new reality. In some ways, the oil crisis was the best marketing campaign Japanese car makers never had to pay for. The 1980s and 90s introduced a wave of technology: ABS, brakes, airbags, and electronic systems that made driving safer. The SUV craze began, minivans became the symbol of family life, and luxury brands pushed cars as status symbols more than ever. But another shadow was growing on the horizon: the environment. That's when Toyota once again made history with the Prius in 1997. It was the first mass-produced hybrid, running on both gasoline and electricity. At first, people thought it was just a weird-looking science experiment. But soon, Leonardo DiCaprio was showing up to red carpet events in his Prius. People started thinking, that's actually kind of cool, signaling that green had gone mainstream. Cars were no longer just about speed or style. They were about responsibility. Driving became a statement about who you were and what you believed in. And then came the disruptor, Tesla. When Elon Musk took Tesla from a niche startup to a global powerhouse in the late 2000s, he flipped the entire car industry on its head. Electric cars were no longer slow, short-range oddities. They were sleek, powerful, and fast, sometimes even faster than gasoline supercars. More importantly, Tesla made electric cars desirable. EVs weren't about sacrifice. They were about flex. Other companies scrambled to catch up, and for the first time in over a century, the dominance of the gasoline engine was genuinely threatened. Which brings us to today, and maybe tomorrow: self-driving cars. What started as science fiction is now inching into reality. Google's Waymo, Tesla's Autopilot, and a host of other companies are racing to make cars that don't need human drivers. In theory, self-driving cars could save lives, reduce traffic, and give us all back the hours we waste behind the wheel. But here's where things get messy. Who's to blame if a self-driving car crashes? The passenger, the company, or the software? What if an AI has to choose between saving its passenger or a group of pedestrians? The debate isn't just technical. It's ethical, legal, and deeply human. The car isn't just a vehicle. It's a mirror of civilization. From dusty Roman roads to gleaming Teslas, from Bertha Benz's brave little road trip to AI steering wheels. Each chapter in its history says as much about people as it does about machines. And if the past is any clue, the story isn't anywhere near finished.